Ever since he entered the league, Justin Herbert has been chasing Patrick Mahomes, but in any given season, I don't think it's impossible that he could not only have a better year than him, but possibly even win the MVP.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer. We've been covering the Chargers together now for 7 seasons, but this is our 5th season as a host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you guys, as always, for making us your first listen, and to make sure you never miss the show, make sure you're subscribing or following for free on YouTube and listening wherever you get your podcasts. David, it is Fan Mail Friday, and we have a great question, and that is, what is it going to take for Justin Herbert to catch up to Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs and get him an MVP award? And we'll talk about what the situation would have to be for that to happen, because obviously Patrick Mahomes already has, first of all, is one of the best quarterbacks ever, if not the best, just talent-wise. Also has Andy Reid, a Hall of Fame tight end, and much more. So we'll talk about that, but we also have much more to get into as well, including if the Chargers are going to be done in free agency this season after the first initial wave of moves that we've seen, why it would be so beneficial for them to go and get John Johnson, and also what they could potentially get if they do decide to trade back in the 2023 NFL Draft. But it starts with a voicemail, David, on Fan Mail Friday from one of our favorites. We have a tier calling in, and he has a very important question.
Dan, David, how are you? This is Atir. My question is very simple. What is going to take for Herbert to win the MVP and overtake Patrick Mahomes to win the AFC West, possibly go to Super Bowl? Let me hear your thoughts, please, especially from Mr. David Jordan. Thank you.
Well, David, Atir really wants to know, what do you think it would take for Justin Herbert to do it? Because I don't think it's out of the question that Justin Herbert could have a better season than Patrick Mahomes one of these years and steal an MVP award.
Yeah, I don't think it's outlandish at all, but I do think there is a myriad of different things that need to go right in order for Justin Herbert to win an MVP award. And it starts with health for himself. You got to be healthy. You got to have a 100% version of himself, a healthy offensive line, healthy skill position players, not only on offense, but on defense as well. You need your defensive players to be there and available to give you your best. Also, you have to get a field stretching speed threat. You just cannot get the best and the most out of Justin Herbert without somebody to be able to stretch the field and to be able to allow him to use that big arm the way we know he is capable of. Kellen Moore has to get the most out of Justin Herbert. You have to unlock him. You really have to allow him to attack down the field. Also, you need to include Justin Herbert's running ability. It's something that has not been able to be tapped into. He is very, very good at it. It's a very underrated part of his game. All of those things need to go right for Justin Herbert, and I do believe if that happens, he very, very well could earn himself an MVP award.
Yeah, and I think, we saw what he could do in 2021. In 2021, you saw him put up a very similar statistical season to Patrick Mahomes, right? Aaron Rodgers ends up winning it, and that's the other thing too, is Justin Herbert's not just competing against Patrick Mahomes, he also has to compete against Joe Burrow and Josh Allen and Aaron Rodgers on the Jets or whoever, Lamar Jackson. I mean, there's a bunch of names you could throw in there because Patrick Mahomes has only won 2 out of the last 5, right? Yeah. So it's not just the Patrick Mahomes part of it, but I think in order to catch Patrick Mahomes, the biggest thing is you're going to have the better team around you, right? And also have the better record to win an MVP. Because if you look at what they each did in 2021, Herbert had over 5,000 yards, Patrick Mahomes 48-39. Herbert had more passing touchdowns, more total touchdowns, 2 more interceptions, and he averaged 7.5 yards per attempt, and Patrick Mahomes averaged 7.4 yards per attempt. So it also kind of take a down season for Patrick Mahomes because Patrick Mahomes is probably the best quarterback I've ever seen, most talented quarterback I've ever seen. It's hard, though, because he also has a leg up having, Travis Kelce, having Andy Reid as his play caller. As long as Andy Reid's around, he's always going to have that over Justin Herbert, right? As long as Brandon Staley's a coach, it's hard for me to imagine even if Brandon Staley wasn't the coach that you're going to go find a better offensive mind than that because Andy Reid is one of the best we've ever seen. That specific tandem is insane.
Yeah.
But it's not out of the question that he could have a down season by his standards, which is still elite, obviously, right? Yeah. And Herbert could have a season like he did in 2021 and potentially even better, right?
Yeah.
Because that was what Joe Lombardi, and I truly think that Kellen Moore is a better offensive mind than Joe Lombardi is. But that is what it's going to have to take. It's going to take Kellen Moore working and being great and getting more out of him, because as of right now, there's no other reasons currently on the roster, David, to feel better about it, because they haven't gotten better offensively as a team during free agency, right? They're rolling a lot of the same guys back. Health is going to be huge, but I think even though Justin Herbert has to be better, obviously, than he was last season, and he has to be as good as we've ever seen him, right, to try to catch up to the best quarterback in the league, obviously. But if he has that better team, and he's the best player on a really, really good team, the team that wins the AFC West, I mean, that would be a Super Bowl type of team. It would, if they could overtake Kansas City in the West, and Justin Herbert has a better statistical season than Patrick Mahomes, they definitely could go win a Super Bowl.
Look, it's just not the MVP award, because, I mean, most often it's not just the most valuable player in the league. And again, that's kind of up for interpretation. It's the most valuable player in the league on one of the best teams in the league. I mean, just because that winning element is factored heavily into that equation. We see it year after year after year. But yeah, I don't think there is any question about the fact that there is a ton of untapped potential with Justin Herbert. And I think we're all just very excited to see who is going to be the person or the team that is going to unlock that for Justin Herbert.
And I think the other thing too is, team? What team
of
is gonna?
coaches?
Okay,
team of coaches. That's what I mean, to be very.
It better be the
specific and
Chargers.
Clear.
Anyway,
the
sorry,
Chargers,
it shook me for a second. No, but I think the other thing too that's underrated. He's a really good organization around him, right? An organization that has proven they can build a winning team around him, build a championship roster around him. And the Chargers have big question marks in those departments, right? So that's another thing he has on his side. I don't think Justin Herbert's going to catch Patrick Mahomes as far as just, hey, people are going to say he's consistently better than Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
He has the tools to get to that level. He has the tools to get on the same tier as Patrick Mahomes, even if he's not quite there, right? Which is still like legendary Hall of Fame level player if you get to that level, right? He has that potential. Nobody's going to give him that credit, though, unless he can win. And the Chargers aren't going to win consistently enough and be in the playoffs consistently enough unless they not only, get Herbert, all the weapons that really utilize his skill set, like they always say they will, right? But it doesn't necessarily always happen like that. But also just be able to build the team around him. And I do think, for him to get to that tier, you're right. I think it has to be as a rushing threat as well. I think you'd have to see a lot more of that. But another question that has to do with that, Edgar S. is asking, given the contract talks with Herbert, do you prefer a 5-year deal or something like a 10-year extension? Do we think he has peaked already, or will his current play be what we expect to see moving forward? No, I don't think he's peaked. I think even last year in a down statistical season, I saw him do some things better than I've ever seen from him. Yeah. But for me, David, I've seen enough. Sign him to 20 years if you can. I mean, I don't care.
Right. Well, I mean, hey, I think we see what we've seen a lot lately in professional sports, especially, for example, in baseball. You see these really, really long contracts, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years, which is fantastic for the team because there is a good, strong likelihood that that player is going to outperform that contract. And you're going to be able, especially in football terms, you can manipulate that contract because of the cap. It gives you a lot of flexibility in that sense. And that's why for the player, they're not going to want to do that because they want to sign a shorter term contract to allow themselves to re-dip and get another big contract. So you sign a large contract that kind of restricts your earning potential. If you sign, a 5 or 6 year deal, especially in the case of Justin Herbert, there's a strong chance that he can sign another big deal. So that's going to be the negotiations that are going to have to take place here in order to get this contract done.
And 5 years is a really long deal in the NFL, right? Like that is a long-term extension. There's almost I don't think there is a position other than the quarterback that would even be considered over a 5-year deal. And the 10-year deal, like you've seen with Patrick Mahomes, is very, very rare. You don't see it often.
Well,
but
it's
look
a one
how
of a
good
kind.
look how good that contract looks already. Look at how many dudes are already making more than Patrick Mahomes, who I just told you is the best quarterback in the league, right? And one of the best I've ever seen. Signing him longer is better for the team.
Definitely.
If he continues to play that way. In baseball, it's a little different because you're hoping you get 7 great years out of a 10-year contract, right? And that's considered a success. But you also feel like, hey, by the time we get to year 7, year 8, the salary cap's gone up, the TV contracts have gone up and ballooned that, and guys are going to be making money that really dwarfs it because guys are just going to continue to reset the market at that position. And as the salary cap keeps going up, the percentage of what the quarterbacks makes is going to stay similar, but it's going to be much bigger numbers AAV wise on a yearly basis. So to me, if you could sign him for a 10-year deal, I would do it right now, but I'm sold on him. It just depends how you feel about Justin Herbert. I don't need to see any more. The dude is for real. The Chargers can't figure that out. That's kind of on them, at least in my opinion, right? But
which it seems like they know it, just based off of what they say and their comments. They're like, hey, we don't need to know or see anything else about Justin Herbert. We know he is going to be in the building. He's going to be our guy for a long time.
0% chance that Justin Herbert is not on the Chargers, at least, the next 7 years. I would put it at 100%, 100,000%. But we do have more fan mail questions to get into, including why everyone keeps talking about bringing in John Johnson and what the Chargers could potentially get if they decide to trade back from 21. But I do need to tell you guys that the Built March Madness bracket is here, and it's still going right now, guys, as we enter the final weekend of the tournament. We know you guys have a favorite bar or puff, and right now it's your time to make it count. Go to marchmadness.com to vote for your favorites. I'll be voting for the peanut butter brownie. It's a classic, but you guys can support your favorite team and your favorite bar, and there's so many great flavors to choose from. It's like, hey, if you go double chocolate, I get it. If you go salted caramel, I get it. If you go cookies and cream, I understand. You might be wrong, but there's really no wrong answer with Built Bar because they are the best protein bar out there, and really, they are the only Cinderella story that you need because you shouldn't be able to get something that tastes this good while you're on a diet. But right now, guys, when you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you will also be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built Bars. Not only that, one Locked On fan will get a 12-month subscription to Built to have the Built's best bars delivered right to your door for a year. It's probably worth like $1 million. Now run to Built Bar Matches, BuiltMarchMadness.com to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote for the rest of March, so make sure you guys go support your pick. A couple days left. 1 day left, really, as you're hearing this, so go get it done. All right, David. Well, we do have more fan mail questions to get in here. Thank you to a tier, but we do have another voicemail here from Weston that I want to get into, including why the Chargers and everyone seems so interested in safety John Johnson.
Hey, guys. It's Weston from Minnesota. I just have 2 really quick questions for you guys. Could you tell me a little bit about what John Johnson is like and what he's specifically good at and why we want him so bad and why we haven't signed him yet? And another quick question, if we were to trade out of the first round, I know there's been talk about it, what do you think we could get for compensation? Thanks, guys. Love the show. Bolt up.
All right, David, let's start with the trading back part of this because it depends kind of what metrics you're going off. For this, I looked at the Jimmy Johnson trade chart, which gives every pick in the draft a point value. So that way you can kind of see, hey, what a 4th round pick is compared to a 1st round pick.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing is, David, is it depends how far you want to go down, right? Because if you go down a couple spots, it's not going to be much. If you want to drop back into the 2nd round, now you're talking about a much better pick, a day 2 pick probably.
Right, which, I mean, according to his question, he said, hey, if the Chargers trade out of the 1st round. So I kind of went the first couple of picks, first 4 picks in the 2nd round. If you trade back to that level, according to the trade chart, you should expect to pick up that 2nd round pick right there where you're trading back to and an extra 3rd round pick. So that means you would have 2 2nd round picks and 2 3rd round picks. Obviously, there is a bunch of different interchangeable parts, but that's usually, the top value.
It's not going to be exact usually.
Right. It's not going to be exact. Obviously, there's, a bunch of different ways that they can get this done. But I think at optimal value, you're probably looking to get that 2nd and an extra 3rd. So another, day 2 pick.
Right. So when I looked at it, everything has a point value. So the Chargers' point value with their 1st round pick is 800 points, right? So the next closest one, so the Ravens aren't going to trade up by 1 spot, obviously. So if they go back to 23 where the Vikings are at, right, that would gain you approximately a late 4th round pick. If you were to trade to 32, which is really the first pick of the 2nd round because the Dolphins don't have a 1st round pick, you would get roughly a 3rd round pick. But that's Jacksonville. So if Jacksonville...
a late 3rd,
Right. So if Jacksonville was to swap with the Chargers at 21, the Chargers were to move into the 2nd round.
Yeah.
What they would get for that is like the Steelers' 3rd round pick, right? Like that's what the equivalent would be points-wise. It would be like the Steelers, like the 80th, 76th to 80th overall pick. But you can't get the Steelers pick, right? So it has to be somewhere around that, which is why it would be a later third-round pick, because that's what the Jaguars have. So it just depends on who you're doing with, what picks they have, and how they're going to make up that point difference. But unless you're trading out of the first round altogether, you're not getting anything probably better than a fourth-round pick. So you have to make a decent-sized drop into the second round, at least according to the chart. Obviously, things change, and people are the ones that actually make this decision, not a chart.
Yeah.
Let's get to the next question here John Johnson. The second part of that question. I mean, I think, David, the quick answer is just he's a perfect fit in Brandon Staley's defense, and you've already seen it work.
Yes, you have. You've seen it work. He's also played his best football in the Brandon Staley system. And I think the reason why you should be excited about the potential about the Chargers bringing him in is that he's very interchangeable with Derwin James. He's a guy that can play in the box. He can play in the slot. He can play back deep. All things that Derwin James can do. So you can really have fun with that safety tandem, and you can really move them around. That's why you would be excited about bringing in John Johnson.
And I think you could use Alohi Gilman more tactically and just as depth too, which I think is probably what his best role is. Hey, if you got a full season and broke out as a starting safety, like he had some really good games last season.
Sure, yeah.
And it's not impossible.
He was great in the Miami game.
You're better if he's not your starter. If he is your starter, doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to be good, but you'd be better if he's a guy that you can get out there in sub packages. If you can use him and potentially John Johnson and Derwin James as like an edge rusher or something. Now you're opening more things up for yourself, right?
Agreed.
Let's get to K-Man here who has a question. With only 21 days left of free agency, I think what he means is basically before the draft, do you think that there are any chances that the Chargers will pick up another free agent at the same time? What Chargers free agents do you think will get picked up by other teams? So we were talking about John Johnson. I think, David, we will see some picks after the draft, but I think if there's any splash signings still left out there, it's probably John Johnson.
I agree. I definitely agree. I think leading up to the draft here, that's probably the only big ticket, big fish.
And interest, right?
Yeah. And, we know that they have interest. Lindsay Theory of ESPN covers the Chargers. She said in one of her latest articles that the Chargers are still pursuing and engaging with John Johnson's team and his people. So they are trying to get that deal done. As why it hasn't happened, I mean, there's a bunch of different things. You might be waiting it out, waiting to see if somebody, after the draft, it becomes a bigger need or somebody gets hurt. There's a lot of different reasons why that could happen. But as far as players that could potentially leave, that were associated with the Chargers, I think two names kind of come to my mind. Bryce Callahan being one of them, just coming off of a resurgent type of year, and Kyle Van Noy, because he had 5 sacks to end the season, and teams were always looking for a pass rush and a veteran leadership. So I think both those guys coming off of really good seasons, I think they could potentially find work other places.
Yeah, I can see that too. I mean, both guys had really good seasons. Obviously, not great for them that they haven't been picked up at this point because both are on the wrong side of 30, especially Kyle Van Noy, right? He's been around a long time. So, I think there's still a chance those dudes get signed after the draft as well. So just because it doesn't happen before the draft doesn't mean it's not going to happen. I throw Matt Filer in there too, right? Because I think, experienced offensive lineman, especially as a 30-year-old, a really durable 30-year-old.
Yeah.
I think there's a team that can and should see if they can, get him to tap back into what we saw from him in 2021 when he was actually a really good, really steady performer for the Chargers at left guard, right? So if I was another team and they were asking me, I'd say, hey, give Matt Filer a try because the dude maybe had some rough moments last year. I thought he picked it up a little bit towards the end of the season, but I think he still has some football left in him. And I think there are a lot of really bad offensive lines out there that could use at least the competition of Matt Filer in there.
Without a doubt.
I mean, we saw Dan Feeney get a contract right away after he left the Chargers. No shade, Dan Feeney. I'm sorry. You had the best mullet, and I think that's what it was. Is like I wanted you to be good so bad because the mullet was just so sweet, and it just didn't work out, So I apologize for taking that shot out of left field, but it's only because I wanted you to be great so bad. But I think, more than likely, I wouldn't be surprised if John Johnson gets signed at this point, and I would love it. I wouldn't be surprised if the Chargers try to address some of their offensive line issues potentially before the draft. Little deals, maybe they try to bring back Will Clapp or something like that and just plug a hole before, maybe the rest of that well is dry. But the market is such a snail's pace right now because of so many big moves already being made.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a rush for Tom Telesco at this point with anyone other than potentially John Johnson. But I think by the fact that John Johnson hasn't signed at this point is better and better for the Chargers because the team that's going to continue to make more and more sense for him, especially if he's not getting the numbers you want,
Yeah.
is a guy where he knows he fits in the defense.
Hey,
and
come
he knows
rebuild your value with Brandon Staley. There's been several examples as to why that is a good idea.
I mean, you would think so. Yeah, Bryce Callahan's still out here, and Kyle Van Noy's still out there.
Yeah.
And Morgan Fox is only signing for $3.5 million a season. Like, all those dudes definitely played the best they have in a while under Brandon Staley. It just didn't turn into a contract for them, which seems kind of odd, honestly, to me, because all those dudes should have a role, and I'm sure potentially will have a role at some point and with some team. We'll see if it ends up being the Chargers, because a lot of those guys still could make sense for the Chargers. I don't think Matt Filer wants to come be a backup to Jamari Sawyer, but Kyle Van Noy, Bryce Callahan, both of those slots are still pretty open for the Chargers.
Yeah.
But we do have more fan mail questions to get into before we end up getting into how many wide receivers will the Chargers take in the upcoming draft. If it has to be an offensive player in round one, and after we let Sean Merriman steal a player from his old team, we will steal a player from his old team, and we're not going to go with the same answer as he picked. But before we get into that, I do need to tell you guys that the tournament is heating up, and this is the last weekend right now, and there's no place better to get in on the action than America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel. Right now, guys, I don't really need to tell you this tournament has spoken for itself. The craziness, the madness, even if it's a sport you don't like as much, you're football guys, and we're talking about basketball, there's nothing that adds a little bit more action, especially if your team's not in the tournament anymore, than having some action on it, right? It just gives a little bit more juice. It just makes everything better. And right now, it's a great time to sign up for FanDuel because they are giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. That means you actually can win even when you lose. All you have to do is go to FanDuel.com/lockdown to sign up to claim your no-sweat first bet today. Then you can wager on everything from the money line to point spreads to which teams will be cutting down the net. I'm saying Aztecs all the way. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So don't miss your shot at that no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockdown to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. All right, David, we do have some more fan mail questions we have to get in here too. And let's start with this one from Bolt Up Andrew. Another guy always asks really, really good questions. We appreciate you, Andrew. But he asks, with Jason Moore, Michael Bandy, and DeAndre Carter, Jason Moore, not coming back, and Jalen Guyton still a free agent, how many wide receivers do you think the Chargers take in the draft? It's a great question, David. What do you think? What do you think the number is?
The number for me is 2. I think they're gonna add 2 guys in this draft. I think one of them is gonna be hopefully that explosive speed threat that we desperately have been calling for, and they definitely need. And I think another guy that could return punts and kicks, because I just don't know if that player right now is on the team currently, and they definitely need to address that. I mean, DeAndre Carter was a great punt returner for them last year. He is obviously gone now. He signed with the Raiders, and so they're going to have to look for somebody to replace that value. So, yeah, I'm going to go with 2 wide receivers in the draft.
I'm going to take 6. And I'm going to say I'm going to throw as many darts at this board as I can, and one of these dudes is going to turn into the best weapon, for Justin Herbert and complete this offense and make them a total juggernaut. Now, I think you're right on there. Giovanni Navarra asked a similar question just about, hey, what are the Chargers going to do now with their punt return unit? Their just return game in general. And I think you bring up a great point where it's like it does feel like it's 2 because it's not just adding, wide receiver 4 and that speed threat, hopefully something that complements Mike Williams and Keenan Allen's game, but it's also finding someone to return. And I think if I was picking, that person is not on the roster, and the most likely place it's going to come is from the draft. So it'll be interesting to see, returners are definitely one of the later things we'll be getting into, but something that's definitely on our radar and something the Chargers should definitely pick up in the draft. I think the big question here is how many wide receivers are they going to carry, like on game days? Because last year it was 5, and they needed that last guy to, be a special teams player, which is why, Tyron Johnson once upon a time didn't make the team because he wasn't contributing on special teams. And when they did have 5 last year, when it was Jalen Guyton, DeAndre Carter, Josh Palmer, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, that's not a bad group of 5 right there. You have guys that are filling specific needs for you. Mm-hmm. But we all saw how that depth dissipated quickly. So I think they should carry 6 wide receivers.
Well, now that there's no 3 quarterbacks, hopefully we'll get that spot reserved for a wide receiver, huh?
They'll 100% take a quarterback in this draft class, right? And they'll carry 3 of them.
Of course they will.
Anyway, so I think as far as receivers go, I think it's super beneficial to have 3, more guys than you have right now and carry 6 of them.
Yeah.
If I had to guess, I'd say 2 in the draft, and one potential Jalen Guyton signing. So with Jalen Guyton,
That's where I'm at too.
yeah. For a total of 6, hopefully, right? Hopefully it's like a day 1 or 2 pick on an explosive wide
Yes.
receiver.
Yes.
6th or 7th round pick on a returner,
There
hopefully
you go.
something around that. Or you really heavily target it in undrafted free agency, which is potentially a chance too. And then maybe you take a more a more wide receiver ready receiver with your double dipping, at that position potentially. But Jalen Guyton's 6 months out from his ACL injury, week 3 of the season against the Jaguars. I just think he's probably not healthy enough yet, which is why you haven't really seen him get signed by anyone. But I still think Jalen Guyton, if he comes back and has a full recovery, could have a role as maybe wide receiver 5, or something like that, a backup kind of speed option, someone to give you that depth because they currently don't have it. But he also doesn't bring a lot of special teams, so I just don't know if they'll do it. Let's go to Jermaine Williams, who's asking, does pick 21 in the first round have to be an offensive player? Because I'm thinking so. David, I think this is a sentiment that's out there. What do you think?
I mean, I don't think it has to be an offensive player. I would prefer it to be an offensive player because I feel like the concentration needs to be on adding as many weapons for your superstar quarterback as humanly possible.
Right.
But I could be persuaded if there isn't a stud edge rusher available there, I could be talked
Swayed?
into that
Sure,
potentially, maybe. And hey, I personally wouldn't hate a Brian Branch type of situation there, just because I feel like if you created a defender in the lab to specifically put into the Chargers defense, he seems like the perfect person, a guy that's a really good run defender, a really versatile player. I can see the application so clearly in my mind. I could be persuaded for that too, but in my heart, I would much rather prefer an offensive weapon.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of thought this. I've heard Matt Money Smith talk about this too, where it's just like, hey, the defense probably isn't going to be all the way fixed. And even if you were to fix it up to the best possible, scenario, there's still dudes who are going to put up 30 on you because they're just that good in the NFL.
Yeah.
You still have to go up against Josh Allen and Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes that can hang 30 on any defense, it feels like, right? So, like, I understand the concept of, like, hey, we're closer to being an unstoppable offense than we are winning a Super Bowl with our defense. And I totally agree with that, to a certain extent. Yeah. But you can't pigeonhole yourself totally, right? Like, if one of these dudes drops you, like Jalen Carter, right? Maybe the scandal catches up to him and he ends up, falling way down. Like, there has to be a concession. Like, I love Nolan Smith, and I'd be willing to take him because I know how important edge rushers are, and I know, how the shelf life is looking for guys like Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa with the cap hits they're going to carry in 2024.
Deteriorating quickly.
Sure, and like, I get it, and I think you have, I wouldn't be upset. And there's a chance, they could even take a corner, and we'll talk about some of the corners in the first round. It's Brandon Staley, so you never really know. And the cornerback situation, especially with Michael Davis going into his last season, is a little murky with the J.C. Jackson. Right, so I love Brian Branch. I love Nolan Smith. There's guys that I love there. If they just take and reach for some guy on defense instead of taking really, really good offensive players, it'll upset me. So I like offense, but I also, we don't know how the draft's going to fall yet. In perfect world, I think you get somebody to help Justin Herbert and really kind of round out this offense, not only for Justin Herbert, but for Kellen Moore as well.
Yes.
Colby Talbert has an idea of getting Kellen Moore some more weapons, and it's stealing players in a time machine back from the 2006 roster, which is, I think, where he was going with this when he asked who would be more valuable to the team as presently constructed, all in their prime: LaDainian Tomlinson, Sean Merriman, Antonio Gates, Vincent Jackson, Quentin Jammer, Eric Weddle, Jamal Williams, or other. I'm not going to go with Jamal Williams. I left that to Sean Merriman. Where are you going with this one, David?
I mean, this was a little difficult just because I absolutely love Antonio Gates, and he is one of my favorite players of all time.
Right.
But the answer here is LT. I mean, come on. LT is unbelievable. He was dominant at everything. Amazing vision. Stop and start ability and agility was next level. His pass protection was fantastic. He had strength to break tackles. He had a nasty stiff arm, home run speed threat, route running ability of a wide receiver. I mean, a touchdown machine. I mean, there's just no question. LT was phenomenal. You put him in that rushing attack with Justin Herbert and that arm. I mean, good freaking luck.
I think that's the right answer because he's a Hall of Fame player. Him and Antonio Gates are both Hall of Fame players, right? So, like, you can't go wrong. I think I could play devil's advocate and make a good case for Antonio Gates just because, like, I think the gap, well, I don't know. I'm not going to say that. I mean, it's a huge gap between Austin Eckler and LT as much as the gap between Gerald Everett and Antonio Gates.
Yeah.
But it's a passing weekend. If you're talking about just straight positional value, which position is more valued in the NFL? Tight end is probably over running back. Neither one of them is huge. Wide receiver is probably the best one, right? Could you make a case for Vincent Jackson and his 4.46 40 time coming into the fold, right? And getting that deep threat and speed threat in your offense? Who knows? I think LT is ultimately the answer you have to go with. I think defensively, the guy that gets left out a lot, like, what about a prime Antonio Cromartie?
Yes.
Getting 10 interceptions in a season.
Yeah, seriously.
That dude, I think,
that
always
length,
gets left
that
out of
speed, the ball skills, just unbelievable.
Prime Antonio Cromartie. It might not have lasted super long, but it was
was
a lot
insane.
of fun.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, man. I mean, when that dude was peaking, 3 interception game against Peyton Manning, that was a lot of fun to watch.
The
crow,
one above
yeah.
his, behind his head, just unbelievable. I mean, that guy was
Still
crazy good.
made, top 3 interception of all time, just as far as difficulty level. He had the
Seriously,
Odell
yes.
Beckham catch, right? As
Before
a
it was
defender,
that, yeah.
before Odell Beckham was even at LSU, right?
Yes.
So that was an insane catch. I had it on my MySpace wall as part of my background. Was that catch? It was just an iconic moment. He'd help your kick return game. That's for sure.
Oh yeah,
I saw
definitely.
the dude take 109
yards
back
to the house, man.
So I mean, there's a ton of gun options. That was super, super talented team. LT's probably the right answer though. But that is going to wrap things up for today's show. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this week. David Drogemeyer putting in the work to bring on some really, really good guests, and we're going to continue to try to get some guests on the show next week as well. But Monday's show is going to be reserved for Mock Draft Monday, where we're getting into our first 4-round mock of the season. 2 separate 4-round mocks. I'll do one. David Drogemeyer will do one, and we'll make our case for some new prospects on Monday. So make sure you guys don't miss it. Make sure you are following or subscribing for free to YouTube and listening wherever you get your podcast from. You can also find the show every day on all of our social media. You can find me on Twitter at DanTalkSports and David Drogemeyer on Twitter at DroTalkSD. You can also find the show's Twitter at LockedOnLAC. And thank you to everyone who wrote their questions in on Twitter and called into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. You can also hit us up on Instagram at LockedOnChargers. We do have a TikTok out there that my wife is running, Locked On Chargers, and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. You can also see our YouTube shorts on YouTube as well, something we're playing around with too. So lots of ways to find the show, trying to get as much content out there. It's the only daily Chargers podcast, but we appreciate you guys making us your first listen. If you need a second listen, give a chance to the Locked On NFL Scouting Show with the draft dudes, from free agency to the draft to salary cap management and more. Experts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino take you through what it's like to build a successful NFL franchise, and you can find it on YouTube and wherever you guys get your podcasts. But make sure you're back here for the first 4-round mock draft of the offseason. But until then, take it easy and go Bolts.